You know that feeling when someone half your age thinks they can replace 22 years of experience with a spreadsheet? Well, let me tell you what happened when that cost someone $2.1 billion and nearly destroyed a company that's been around since Texas was still figuring out what to do with all that oil. The conference room on the 18th floor of Lone Star Properties always smelled like leather and old money. I'm Harold Peterson, 54 years old, and I'd been breathing that air for 22 years. Senior Development Director. Basically, I was the guy who made the impossible deals happen in a state where everything's bigger, including the egos and the mistakes. In my career, I'd closed 35 deals worth over $18 billion. Not bad for a guy who started in the surveying department of a small oil company back in Oklahoma. But this deal with Caldwell Ranch Holdings, this was going to be my masterpiece. $2.1 billion, 72 hours until closing. 2 years of careful relationship building with Victor Caldwell coming together like a perfect storm of trust and timing. I was standing at my desk that Friday afternoon checking the survey maps one more time on my tablet. The afternoon sun was hitting the glass just right, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floors. Outside, Dallas stretched out below me, all glass and steel, rising from what used to be cattle country. You could still see traces of the old ranching roads if you knew where to look, like scars on the landscape that refused to heal. The Caldwell deal wasn't just numbers on a balance sheet, it was personal. Victor's great-grandfather had run cattle on that land for 3 generations before oil was discovered underneath. This was old Texas money meeting New World development, and I was the bridge between both worlds. The kind of bridge you build with handshakes and kept promises, not algorithms and optimization protocols. My vintage Rolex GMT caught the light as I reached for my coffee cup. The weight of it on my wrist always centered me when things got complicated. Reminded me that some things never go out of style. Time was time, whether you measured it with a Swiss movement or a smartphone app. That's when my office door practically exploded open. Brandon Davis marched in like he owned the place, which in a way he kind of did. His mother Patricia was executive VP, and in corporate America, nepotism flows thicker than crude oil. Brandon was 28, fresh out of Stanford with an MBA that probably cost more than my first house and an attitude that could power half of Houston. He had that look in his eyes, you know the one, the look that says I'm about to revolutionize everything around here and you dinosaurs better evolve or go extinct. He was wearing what I'd come to recognize as the tech bro uniform. Crisp white shirt, dark jeans that probably cost $300, and boots that had never seen a day of actual work. His laptop bag was slung over his shoulder like some kind of digital sword, ready to slay the dragons of inefficiency. Harold Peterson, he announced. Not asked, announced. That's me, I said, not looking up from my mineral rights documentation. The subsurface easement clauses needed one more review before Monday's signing ceremony. These weren't the kind of details you could delegate to junior associates or automate with software. They required understanding the history of the land, the politics of the families who'd owned it, and the complex relationships between tribal councils and state regulators that went back generations. We need to talk. I glanced at my Rolex again, 3:47 p.m. In my experience, nothing good ever came from unscheduled meetings on Friday afternoons. That's when people made emotional decisions they'd regret by Monday morning. We weren't scheduled to meet until next week, Brandon. Plans change, he said, stepping closer. I could smell his cologne, something expensive that probably came with its own app and subscription service. I'm Chief Innovation Officer now. Strategic transformation is my mandate, another made-up title for the boss's kid. In my 22 years at Lone Star, I'd seen a dozen of these innovation positions created for people who couldn't earn their way into the real jobs. Chief Digital Officer, Director of Disruptive Strategies, Vice President of Paradigm Shifts. They usually lasted about 18 months before moving on to daddy's friends' companies or starting their own consulting firms with names like Synergy Solutions or NextGen Dynamics. Congratulations on the promotion. What can I do for you? Brandon pulled out his laptop, opening what looked like a presentation deck. The screen was covered with charts and graphs that probably meant something to someone, but looked like abstract art to me. Lots of blue and orange colors, ascending line graphs, and buzzwords in sans serif fonts. I need to discuss some fundamental issues with your client relationship methodology. Your approach is creating systematic inefficiencies in our collaborative framework. I blinked. This 28-year-old was critiquing my methodology. The same methodology that had never lost a deal in 22 years had survived 3 recessions, 2 oil busts, and the 2008 financial crisis. The methodology that had built relationships with families who'd been in Texas since before the Alamo, who measured business success in generations rather than quarters. Brandon, I've closed 35 deals worth over $18 billion. Victor Caldwell specifically requested me for this acquisition. His exact words were, "I only do business with Harold Peterson. He understands that some things matter more than money." "That's exactly the problem," he said, his voice getting sharper. He was clicking through his presentation now, pointing at slides filled with data that looked impressive but felt hollow. "You're operating like it's 1985. We don't do business based on golf course handshakes and steakhouse meetings anymore. We have data-driven protocols, algorithmic risk assessment, and CRM optimization platforms." He was reading from his screen now like he was giving a TED Talk to his business school study group. I'd heard this speech before, or variations of it, from every young hotshot who'd ever walked through our doors thinking they could reinvent an industry that was older than their grandparents. "Data-driven protocols don't close deals with ranch families," I said, keeping my voice level. "My dad had taught me that when someone starts yelling, you whisper. When they get excited, you get calm." It was a lesson that had served me well in negotiations with everyone from oil executives to tribal council chairmen. Relationships do. Victor Caldwell's great-grandfather started that ranch in 1897 with 500 head of cattle and a handshake loan from a banker who knew his word was good. They've survived droughts, oil booms, market crashes, and every economic downturn Texas has thrown at them. You know how they did it, by working with people they trust, people who understand that some agreements can't be reduced to contract language. Brandon's face was getting red now, and I could see a vein starting to pulse in his forehead. He'd probably never been in a room where someone didn't immediately bow to his MBA credentials and his mother's executive position. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Resistance to change, legacy thinking. Our company handbook clearly states we prioritize innovation and scalable solutions over outdated personal relationship models. Legacy thinking. He was calling a century of successful Texas business legacy thinking. I wondered if he'd ever actually read that company handbook he was quoting, or if he'd just skimmed the executive summary while getting his MBA. "Brandon," I said carefully, "the Caldwell family doesn't care about your optimization platforms. They care about integrity, consistency, and knowing that the person they're shaking hands with will still be there to honor that handshake 10 years from now. They've been burned by fast-talking developers who promised the moon and delivered strip malls. Personal relationships don't scale." He snapped back, closing his laptop with more force than necessary. "We need systematic approaches that don't depend on one person's historical connections. What happens when you retire? What happens if you get sick? Your whole client portfolio becomes a single point of failure." That's when I realized what was really happening here. This wasn't about improving processes or modernizing our approach. This was about eliminating me from the equation entirely. Brandon wanted to prove he could handle the major accounts, and taking down a 22-year veteran was his way of establishing dominance in the family business. The problem was, he had no idea what he was actually asking for. "Go home," Brandon said suddenly, crossing his arms like a principal addressing a problem student. "Take the weekend to think about whether you can adapt to our new operational paradigm. Write a formal transition plan for how you'll modernize your client engagement protocols and present it to me Monday morning." I stared at him. The kid was serious. He actually thought he could order me around like some junior associate fresh out of college. "Brandon, we closed the Caldwell deal in 72 hours. Victor's flying in from Houston Sunday night specifically for the Monday morning signing. His legal team, his son Michael, who's taking over ranch operations, the Kiowa Tribal Council representatives for the mineral rights agreements, they're all coming to Dallas for this." The Tribal Council part was crucial, something that would never show up in Brandon's digital files or CRM optimization platforms. 3 years ago, when we first started discussions with Victor about developing his land, we discovered that a portion of the property contained sacred burial grounds that had been protected by a handshake agreement between Victor's grandfather and the tribal chairman back in 1954. No contracts, no legal documents, just 2 men who understood that some things were more important than money. I'd spent 6 months building a relationship with the current chairman, attending tribal council meetings, learning about their history and their concerns about development projects that had disrupted sacred sites in the past. The final agreement we'd reached was elegant in its simplicity. Lone Star would develop the commercial portions of the land while permanently preserving the burial grounds and providing funding for their maintenance. It wasn't the kind of arrangement you could Google or download from a legal database. Then you better figure out how to evolve with this company fast, Brandon said, his voice rising. Because if you can't adapt to data-driven methodologies, maybe you don't belong in this organization anymore. The room went dead quiet. Through the glass walls, I could see analysts in the open workspace stopping mid-conversation, coffee cups frozen halfway to mouths. My assistant, Susan Miller, was standing at her desk, phone in hand, staring at us with wide eyes. She'd been with the company for 8 years, had seen plenty of corporate drama, but nothing quite like this. No, I said simply. The word hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Brandon blinked, his confident expression flickering for just a moment. He'd been expecting pushback, maybe an argument, certainly some kind of negotiation. What he hadn't expected was flat refusal. Excuse me, no, I'm not going home. I'm not writing you a modernization plan. I have actual work to do. Real work that keeps the lights on in this building and pays for your mother's executive parking space. Brandon's face went from red to purple. His hands were shaking slightly as he gripped his laptop tighter, and I could see that vein in his forehead really starting to pulse now. In that moment, he looked exactly like what he was, a privileged kid who'd never been told no in his entire life. Harold, I'm giving you a direct order as Chief Innovation Officer. You're not my boss, Brandon. You're 28 years old with 8 months of work experience and a title your mother created for you because she ran out of ways to justify putting you on the payroll. The truth hit him like a slap. I could see it in his eyes. The moment when all his MBA confidence crumbled and he was just Patricia Davis's son again, the kid who'd always had doors open for him that other people had to earn their way through. You're fired, he screamed. The sound echoed off the glass walls and polished concrete floors like a gunshot. Pack your things. Security will escort you out. Your inflexible, antiquated approach has no place in this organization. Several people in the outer office actually jumped. Susan dropped her phone, the clatter audible even through the glass. 2 junior analysts turned to stare through the walls like they were watching a train wreck in slow motion. I could see phones being pulled out, text messages being typed. By Monday morning, everyone in Dallas real estate would know that Brandon Davis had fired Harold Peterson 72 hours before the biggest deal in Lone Star's history. You're serious? I said. It wasn't a question. I was analyzing, trying to understand if he really comprehended what he'd just done, dead serious. You have 30 minutes to clean out your office. Your resistance to innovation makes you a liability to this company. I looked at the $2.1 billion contract displayed on my tablet screen. 27 months of careful relationship building, countless dinners with Victor and his family, hours spent with tribal council members learning their history and their concerns. All of it reduced to what Brandon saw as an inefficient personal relationship model. Then something clicked in my brain. A cold, clear understanding of exactly what had just happened. He'd just fired the only person in North America who knew that the Caldwell deal hinged on a verbal agreement with the Kiowa Tribal Council about subsurface mineral rights that existed nowhere in Lone Star's digital files. Brandon thought everything important was stored on servers and backed up in the cloud. He had no idea that the most crucial deals still happened, the way they'd happened for generations, with trust, with respect, and with understanding that went deeper than contract language. Okay, I said calmly. Brandon blinked. He'd been expecting a fight, maybe begging, tears, threats of lawsuits. Definitely some kind of dramatic scene he could use to prove his authority to the watching office and later recount to his mother about how he'd finally cleaned house of the old guard. Okay, you're absolutely right, Brandon. Innovation is important. Scalability matters. Data-driven protocols are the future. I picked up my tablet and started closing the Caldwell files. I'll pack my things immediately. The confusion on his face was almost comical. This wasn't the script he'd imagined. In his mind, the old guard was supposed to rage against the dying of the light, not walk quietly into that good night. He'd probably rehearsed this scene in front of his bathroom mirror, preparing for my resistance, so he could demonstrate his firm leadership. Good, he stammered. Security will be up in 10 minutes. That won't be necessary, I said, checking my Rolex again. The familiar weight reminded me that some things never go out of style, never become obsolete, never need upgrading. I know my way out. I've been walking these halls since before you knew what a balance sheet was. I walked past him toward my office, and I swear I could feel him staring at my back, probably wondering why this felt so empty, why his moment of triumph tasted like cardboard. He'd wanted to be the hero of his own story, the young visionary who dragged the company kicking and screaming into the future. Instead, he was just another nepotism hire who'd made the biggest mistake of his short career. My office was a museum of controlled chaos. Unlike the sterile minimalism of the corporate boardrooms, my space was lived in, personal. 22 years of deals, handwritten notes, and relationships that no algorithm could replicate. The walls were covered with deal tombstones, those lucite blocks they give you when you close a major development project. Each one represented months of work, millions of dollars, and dozens of jobs created. Brandon probably thought everything important was digitized these days. He didn't understand that in the world of Texas land development, the real deals were made on personal cell numbers, written on business cards, kept in leather address books that looked like family heirlooms. I didn't rush packing my office. Rushing implies panic, and I felt anything but panicked. I felt liberated.
For the first time in months, I wasn't carrying the weight of other people's quarterly bonuses, corporate politics, or the constant pressure to justify my methods to people who'd never closed a deal worth more than their annual salary.
I opened my desk drawers with the slow precision of a surveyor marking property lines, personal items first. The framed photo of my dad, who'd taught me that your word is your bond, even when it costs you money. He'd been a wildcatter back in Oklahoma, one of those independent oil men who lived or died by their reputation. Son, he used to say, you can lose your money, you can lose your equipment, but you never lose your word. That's the only thing that can't be taken from you. My collection of vintage mechanical pencils went into the box next. Tools of the trade from an era when men drew property lines by hand, when surveying was as much art as science. Each pencil had a story, deals closed with measurements taken in dirt and dust, rather than GPS coordinates and satellite imagery. Then I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, the one with the combination lock that had been there so long most people forgot it existed. Inside was my most valuable possession, a worn leather address book that looked like it belonged in the Smithsonian. It contained personal cell phone numbers for 200 ranchers, tribal leaders, oil executives, and family business owners across Texas and the Southwest. These weren't the kind of contacts you could find on LinkedIn or buy from a marketing database. These were relationships built over decades. Numbers written in ink by hands that had shaken mine in hotel lobbies, ranch houses, and tribal council meeting rooms. Numbers that opened doors, started conversations, and closed billion-dollar deals when the trust was there. I dropped it into my briefcase with a heavy, satisfying thud. Brandon could have his CRM optimization platforms and his algorithmic relationship management. I'd take this leather book over any cloud-based system ever designed. Susan appeared in my doorway, pale as a ghost, clutching a tissue like it might save her job. She'd been my assistant for 8 years, had helped me navigate the complexities of deals that would have broken lesser partnerships. "Harold," she whispered, as if speaking too loud might summon more corporate demons. "Is it true? Did he really fire you?" "It's true, Susan." But the Caldwell deal, her voice cracked. "The closing is Monday. Nobody else knows about the water rights complications in Section 7. Nobody else knows about the tribal council agreements. Nobody else even knows that Victor's son Michael is the real decision-maker for operational integration." She was right, of course. The Caldwell deal wasn't just about buying ranch land for development. It was a complex web of family dynamics, historical agreements, and regulatory requirements that had taken me 2 years to untangle. Victor was 71 years old and ready to retire, but he wanted to make sure his family's legacy was protected. His son Michael, 45 and Stanford educated, had modern ideas about sustainable development that aligned perfectly with current environmental regulations. But Michael was also deeply respectful of his family's history and the promises his grandfather had made to the tribal council. The development plan we'd crafted wasn't just profitable, it was ethical. It honored the past while building toward the future. Brandon probably looked at the financial projections and saw a simple real estate transaction. Buy land, develop it, sell it, collect fees. He had no idea that Victor had turned down 3 previous offers from major developers because they wanted to maximize the revenue potential of every acre, including the sacred burial grounds. I smiled at Susan. It probably wasn't a particularly reassuring smile. "I'm sure Brandon has it all figured out, Susan. He has data-driven protocols and algorithmic risk assessment. What could possibly go wrong?" Susan started crying. Quiet, desperate tears that said she understood exactly what was about to happen to Lone Star Properties. She'd been in the room for dozens of client calls, had seen how these relationships worked, how trust could take years to build and seconds to destroy. What are we going to do? I picked up my briefcase, heavy with 22 years of irreplaceable relationships. Susan, you're staying here. I'm the one who apparently doesn't fit the innovation paradigm. You'll be fine, you're good at your job, and you don't threaten anyone's ego. I walked to the elevator, carrying my box of personal items, feeling lighter than I had in months. The weight of carrying Lone Star's problems, of being responsible for deals that kept hundreds of people employed, of playing corporate politics with entitled children, all of it just evaporated. Brandon was waiting near the elevators, flanked by two security guards who looked about as comfortable as cowboys at a wine tasting. These weren't corporate stormtroopers brought in to intimidate me. They were working guys, Paul and Mike, who'd been with the company for years. Paul had worked security at 3 of my deal closings, had seen the handshakes and celebrations that followed successful negotiations. Make sure he doesn't take any proprietary information. Brandon commanded, still riding high on his power trip. He probably felt like Napoleon after conquering Europe, not realizing he'd just invaded Russia in winter. Paul, who'd worked security at Lone Star for 8 years, barely glanced at my box. He knew me. We'd worked late nights together when big deals were closing, had shared coffee and small talk during the quiet hours when the building was empty except for people who cared enough to stay until the work was done. He's clean, Mr. Davis. Just personal effects. Fine. Brandon snapped. Just get him out of here. I want this negative energy off my floor. Negative energy. 22 years of successful deal-making was negative energy. As the elevator doors opened, I turned to Brandon one last time. He was bracing himself for anger, for threats, for some kind of dramatic scene he could tell his mother about later. Maybe he expected me to beg for my job or promise to change my ways. Instead, I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that probably looked completely insane under the circumstances. Thank you, Brandon, I said. His forehead wrinkled in confusion. What? For clarifying the company's true priorities. It's been very enlightening. Good luck with the Caldwell deal on Monday. That Tribal Council Mineral Rights Preservation Agreement is particularly complex. What Tribal Council agreement? He demanded, stepping forward as the elevator doors began to close. What preservation clause? Oh, I'm sure it's all documented in your CRM optimization platform. I said softly, right there in the Systematic Relationship Management database. The door slid shut, cutting off his increasingly panicked face. I could see him through the glass, frantically pressing the elevator call button, probably already reaching for his phone to call someone who might know what I was talking about. I walked out of that building into the Dallas afternoon sunshine and felt like a man who'd just been released from prison. I drove home to my place in Highland Park and poured myself 3 fingers of Maker's Mark bourbon. Then I sat in my leather chair, turned off my phone, and let myself marinate in the silence for a while. The afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, highlighting the dust motes floating in the air like tiny golden specks of freedom. I spent the weekend doing something I hadn't done in years, absolutely nothing work-related. I worked on my 1967 Mustang in the garage, the one I'd been restoring for 8 years but never had time to finish. Amazing how much clarity you get when you're not carrying the weight of other people's billion-dollar problems on your shoulders. Saturday evening, I grilled a ribeye, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, and watched the sunset from my back porch. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about deal flow or client management or corporate reorganizations. I was just present, just breathing, just being Harold Peterson instead of Senior Development Director Peterson. It wasn't until Sunday evening that I turned my phone back on. The thing practically vibrated itself off the kitchen counter. 23 missed calls, 31 text messages, a digital avalanche of corporate panic that painted a beautiful picture of Lone Star Properties, slowly realizing what they'd lost. Susan, 5:15 p.m. Friday. Harold, legal department is asking who authorized your termination. Brandon locked himself in his office after you left. His mother, Patricia, is asking questions. Susan, 7:30 p.m. Friday, the Caldwell team called for the pre-closing conference call. Brandon took the meeting. It lasted 8 minutes. Victor Caldwell's assistant called back asking specifically for you. Brandon told them you were on indefinite medical leave for family issues. I nearly choked on my wine. Medical leave, family issues, the audacity was breathtaking. Susan, 10:45 a.m. Saturday, emergency meeting this morning. Where are the tribal council files? Brandon is screaming at the IT department. He says, you must have deleted them. IT says they never existed on the server. The partners are asking why this wasn't in the digital handover protocols. Susan, 2:30 p.m. Saturday. Brandon tried calling Victor Caldwell directly. His assistant said he only discusses business with you. Brandon told them you were having serious health issues, but had briefed him completely on the transaction. Harold, what is he doing? I grinned. Of course the tribal council files weren't on the server. The tribal agreement wasn't a standard contractual clause that could be reduced to digital documentation. It was a gentleman's agreement I'd negotiated with the Kiowa Tribal Council chairman about preserving sacred burial grounds while allowing Lone Star to develop the commercial portions of the land. The beauty of it was pure elegance. Without that understanding, any MBA-trained analyst would look at those mineral rights and see revenue opportunity, prime territory for full extraction to maximize the development's return on investment. But those burial grounds were Victor's insurance policy for his family's reputation. His way of ensuring the Caldwell name would be respected in Texas long after the oil was gone and the development was complete. Try to violate that agreement, and Victor Caldwell would walk away so fast it would leave tire marks on Lone Star's marble floors. An email from David Mills. The General Counsel marked urgent. Harold, significant breakdown in communication protocols regarding your employment status. Please call immediately. We need to discuss immediate reinstatement before Monday's closing. This appears to be a misunderstanding that we can resolve professionally. Misunderstanding. They always had such polite ways of saying we screwed up catastrophically and need you to save us from our own stupidity. I didn't reply. Another text came through, this one from a number I didn't have saved but recognized immediately. Victor's private line, Harold, call me, name your price. I looked at that message for a long time, swirling the bourbon in my glass. My price wasn't money. My price wasn't even revenge. Exactly. My price was something Lone Star Properties had just declared worthless: respect for experience, for institutional knowledge, for the understanding that some things in business can't be systematized or optimized or disrupted by 28-year-old MBAs with more ambition than wisdom. My price was dignity. And unfortunately for Lone Star, dignity was a currency they'd just spent their last penny of. I set the phone down and finished my bourbon instead. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. Monday morning, I was making scrambled eggs when my phone rang.
Victor Caldwell's voice, gravelly from 40 years of Texas sun and tough decisions. They canceled the meeting, he said without preamble. Did they now?
I flipped my eggs, keeping my voice neutral. This Brandon character called my office at 6:30 a.m., said there were procedural complications that needed to be resolved before we could proceed. He sounded like he'd been awake all weekend. That's unfortunate, Victor. Harold, what the hell happened over there? My assistant said this boy told our legal team you were taking indefinite medical leave for serious family health issues, but that you'd fully briefed him on our arrangement. I turned off the burner and leaned against the counter. They fired me, Victor. Friday afternoon. Apparently my client relationship methodology wasn't scalable enough for their innovation paradigm. The silence on the other end was absolute. I could practically hear Victor's blood pressure rising. They fired you, he repeated slowly. 72 hours before closing. That's correct. And who's handling the transition of our understanding about the tribal council arrangements? Nobody, I imagine. Brandon believes the digital files contain everything necessary for the transaction. Victor made a sound that was half laugh, half growl. The digital files show those mineral rights as a $3.2 million revenue opportunity. They do indeed. Harold, are you free for breakfast this morning? Victor, I'm unemployed. I'm free all week. Excellent. Adolphus Hotel, 8 a.m. and Harold. Don't sign anything with Lone Star. Not a severance package, not a non-disclosure extension, not a Christmas card. Nothing. Wouldn't dream of it. The Adolphus serves breakfast with the kind of old-world dignity that makes you feel like you're planning something historically significant. Victor Caldwell looked exactly as he always did. Immaculate navy suit, silver hair, eyes that had seen every boom and bust cycle Texas had to offer. They called my lawyers this morning, Victor said, cutting his toast with surgical precision. Brandon Davis personally. He said you were dealing with serious health issues but had complete confidence in his ability to execute the transition seamlessly. He specifically mentioned that you were under doctor's orders to avoid stress, but had insisted on briefing him thoroughly before your medical leave. My attorney asked about the Tribal Council Mineral Rights Preservation Agreement, and he said everything was fully documented in the standard acquisition materials. It wasn't just a lie, it was a verifiable, legally dangerous lie that would expose Lone Star to massive regulatory compliance issues if anyone investigated. He's buying time, I said. He thinks he can charm his way through the technical details and nobody will notice the gaps. He thinks I'm a checkbook with a pulse. Victor wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. I had my people do some research on Mr. Davis. Apparently, Lone Star's board wasn't officially notified of your termination until Saturday morning. HR is reportedly in open rebellion. That sounds about right. Victor leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Here's the situation, Harold. I don't do business with amateurs, and I definitely don't do business with people who lie to my face. The deal with Lone Star Properties is dead. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. It wasn't a development contract, but it looked official. But I still need to sell, and I still need someone I trust to manage the transition. Caldwell Ranch Holdings is looking for a senior partner. The compensation is $250,000 base, plus significant equity participation. The first assignment is to find a new buyer for my land. I looked at the contract. It was freedom. It was vindication. It was the ultimate professional revenge. There's just one thing, Victor added, a shark-like grin spreading across his weathered face. I haven't officially canceled tomorrow's rescheduled meeting with Lone Star yet. Brandon called this morning begging for one more chance to clarify the procedural complications. You want to meet with them? I want to see Brandon Davis's face when he tries to explain why the man who's supposedly on medical leave is sitting on my side of the table as my senior partner. I picked up the pen. Victor, it would be my pleasure. Excellent. Now finish your breakfast. Watching someone's empire crumble is hungry work. Tuesday morning, I walked into Lone Star's building wearing my best suit and a smile that probably qualified as a weapon in several states. The lobby was buzzing with nervous energy. You could practically smell the desperation through the air conditioning. Brandon was waiting near the elevators, flanked by his mother Patricia and the general counsel. When he saw me walk in behind Victor, his face went through several colors before settling on a shade of green that matched the lobby's marble. Good morning, Victor said pleasantly to the assembled group. I believe we had a meeting scheduled. Patricia Davis stepped forward, all damage control and forced smiles. Mr. Caldwell, thank you for your patience with our scheduling complications. Brandon has been working around the clock to ensure a smooth transition. I'm sure he has, Victor replied. I'm particularly interested in hearing his thoughts on the Tribal Council Mineral Rights Preservation Agreement. All eyes turned to Brandon. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound emerged. The truth is, Victor continued, Harold now works for me, senior partner at Caldwell Ranch Holdings, which means if Lone Star Properties wants to salvage any part of this relationship, you'll be negotiating with the man you fired. The silence in that lobby was deafening. However, Victor added with surgical precision, given the misrepresentations about Harold's status and the general unprofessionalism of this entire situation, I'm withdrawing from any development discussions entirely. Brandon finally found his voice. You can't do this. We have preliminary agreements. You had discussions? Victor corrected. Discussions based on working with competent professionals. That assumption has proven incorrect. He turned to me. Harold, what do you think Lone Star Properties might be worth in a distressed asset sale? I pretended to consider it seriously. Given the management instability and reputation damage from this situation, maybe 20 cents on the dollar? 20 cents? Victor nodded. That seems generous. We turned toward the exit. Behind us, I heard Brandon start to make a sound that wasn't quite crying, but wasn't quite breathing either. Harold, he called out, his voice cracking. How could you do this? You worked here for 22 years. I stopped and turned around one final time. The marble lobby, the waterfall, the terrified faces of people I'd worked alongside for more than 2 decades. Brandon, you're absolutely right. I did work here for 22 years, and you ended that in 30 minutes because you didn't like my methodology. I looked around at the assembled crowd of executives, lawyers, and scared employees. Turns out my methodology was exactly what Victor Caldwell was paying $2.1 billion for. Thanks for the career upgrade. We walked out into the Dallas morning, and Victor clapped me on the shoulder. How does it feel to be on the winning side? Like justice, I said. 6 months later, Lone Star Properties was acquired by a private equity firm for 18 cents on the dollar. Brandon Davis was not retained in the transition. Patricia Davis took early retirement. And me? I'm still at Caldwell Ranch Holdings, closing deals and building relationships the old-fashioned way, with handshakes, with trust, and with the understanding that experience isn't something you can download from a business school textbook. Sometimes the young lions forget that the old wolves know exactly where all the bones are buried. In Brandon's case, he learned that lesson the expensive way. 2.1 billion expensive. The corporate world loves to talk about disruption and innovation, but some things never change. Respect is earned. Trust takes time to build. And when you fire someone who holds the keys to the kingdom, you better make sure you know where all the doors are first. Thanks for listening to my story. If you enjoyed watching entitled Corporate Nepotism Get Exactly What It Deserved, well, there are more stories where this came from, and they all end with the good guys winning. Every generation thinks they're the first to discover fire, but sometimes the old ways survive because they actually work. You can automate processes, digitize relationships, and optimize everything, but you can't algorithm your way out of stupidity.